US President Barack Obama says sanctions have been effective in that they've led Iran to the negotiating table. Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu says the US should keep up the pressure. Iran says US flip-flopping is destroying a historic chance to ease decades of tension. Is Israel isolated in its stance on Iran? Will Presidents Obama and Rouhani reach a historic agreement? This is the debate.
It is absolutely clear that words are not sufficient, that we have to have...
Tehran has criticized U.S. President Barack Obama over what it called his flip-flopping when it comes to Washington's stance on Iran. Tehran hit back after Obama claimed that Iran had agreed to talks under the pressure of U.S. sanctions. Obama was speaking at a meeting with Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif called on Obama to show consistency in his administration's policy regarding Tehran if he seeks to build mutual confidence.
President Obama's presumption that Iran is negotiating because of his illegal threats and sanctions is disrespectful of a nation, macho and wrong.
Zarif also spoke of the Israeli Prime Minister's speech at the UN General Assembly, saying Benjamin Netanyahu was going to give another deceptive show at the world body.
The sole aim of Netanyahu and the pro-Israeli lobbies is to stop the progress of talks so they will be able to pressure the US Congress into imposing more sanctions on Iran and preventing the US president from reaching a negotiated solution with Iran. We know that many in the US are looking for a pretext to put pressure on the great Iranian nation. We know that warmongers are worried that disputes will be resolved. We will not allow Netanyahu to decide the fate of negotiations. We have heard many similar remarks from Israeli officials. We will respond in the strongest possible terms. It's important to know that this is the beginning of a tough road. This is a diplomatic battle, not a friendly and cordial relationship.
There came a glimmer of hope that the U.S. and Iran would bury the hatchet after Obama's recent speech at the UN General Assembly. In his address, Obama said the U.S. does not seek regime change in Iran and that it is ready for talks based on mutual respect. His comments came against a decades-long backdrop of tensions between the two countries. Washington and Tehran severed ties after the victory of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which led to the downfall of Iran's U.S.-backed monarch, the Shah. Washington stands accused of being accomplice in the authoritarian rule of the former monarch at the expense of the Iranian people. Iran has frequently accused the U.S. of hatching subversive plots against the Islamic Republic after the revolution. Many believe that it would be very demanding and difficult for the U.S. government to change its policy on Iran, as the White House is now under pressure from Israel and pro-Israeli lobbies which are against an easing of tensions between Tehran and Washington. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has on a couple of occasions urged the U.S. government not to allow outside players and lobby groups to decide its foreign policy, especially when it comes to Iran.
You're watching the debate. Joining us now live from Madison is Mr. James Fetzer, professor with the University of Minnesota Duluth. And I'd also like to welcome our guest in New York, Mr. Alon Ben-Meir, Mideast Director of the World Policy Institute. Thank you very much for being with us. My first question to Mr. Fetzer in Madison. Now, we saw President Obama's speech at the UN General Assembly, what he said regarding Iran, and then we again saw what he said on Iran after his meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu. How are you interpreting this sudden change in tone?
Well, I believe it's a very positive development. Netanyahu's case against diplomatic relations with Iran is built on two false premises. First, the claim, based on a false translation, that Iran wants to destroy Israel. On 25 October 2005, then President Ahmadinejad cited the Ayatollah Khomeini's observation, "This regime occupying Jerusalem must vanish from the pages of time," which was a call for regime change, not the destruction of Israel. While the loss of his position as prime minister might be a catastrophe for Netanyahu, I believe the world would breathe a sigh of relief. Second, it is based upon the false claim that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. the 16 intelligence agencies of the United States converged in the conclusion in 2007 that Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapons program, a conclusion that they reaffirmed in 2011, which means that the imposition of sanctions upon Iran for the development of a nuclear weapons program by the Obama administration is contradicted by the findings of its own intelligence agencies and represents a form of collective punishment which was found to be a war crime by the Nuremberg Tribunal.
Well, let's bring in Mr. Alan Ben-Meir on this as well, I guess, in New York. Now, Mr. Ben-Meir, we heard Mr. Fetzer saying there that the Israeli stance, especially on Iran, is based on two factors that, according to Mr. Fetzer, are not based on factual evidence. One is that Iran wants to destroy Israel. The second is that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. We did hear Benjamin Netanyahu refer to both of these. What's your opinion about these two claims, first of all? And do you think that Israel and the United States differ in terms of these two facts?
Well, I think if there's any question or doubt about what Iran is after, it would have been very easy for the government in Iran to solve this problem by allowing international inspectors to come unannounced and freely to see Iran's nuclear facilities. So this is not happening. Iran is also refusing to answer serious questions to the IAEA in terms of its nuclear program. Iran is pursuing at a rapid speed the development of much more sophisticated centrifuge for the exact purpose of producing more and more uranium. So the onus falls on Iran to demonstrate, to show that in fact Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and it can do so by simply following some of these steps. As to the position that President Obama has taken after he spoke at the General Assembly and after he had a conversation with Netanyahu, I do not see any real difference. President Obama has said all along that all options are on the table, that he is willing to sit down and have a diplomatic solution, but it's going to take two to tango. So because of Rouhani's overture, and because of Rouhani's repeated statements that he is willing to sit down and ease the tension between the two countries and reach an agreement, it is now time for the Iranian government to demonstrate that kind of flexibility and to start with, stop enriching of uranium while these negotiations are going on.
Well, you said there that
once they start.
Yes, you said there that Iran is refusing supervision or snap inspections of its nuclear facilities and activities. I'll go to our guest, Mr. Fetzer in Madison, on this as well. Now, Mr. Fetzer, Iran has been saying, and I'm quoting officials here and those involved with the nuclear program, that it's been allowing IAEA inspections of its nuclear capability, of its nuclear facilities, its nuclear activities, and that the supervision that the IAEA now has on Iran's activities is even beyond what Iran is entitled to based on the NPT. And at the same time, I'd like to have your comment on how Iran's cooperation with the IAEA plays into this, and the fact that the IAEA has not come up with any evidence that Iran is pursuing a weapons program. And then Israel, which is known to possess nuclear weapons as the only entity in the region that's known to possess nuclear weapons. How ironic that is when it comes out and says that it wants Iran to stop enriching uranium, to put its entire nuclear program altogether away, and that coming from an entity that has weapons of mass destruction itself.
Well, of course, all the points you make are impeccable. Iran has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has allowed inspectors. Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons. All of that is very evident in the record. Israel, however, has 200 to 600 of these little beauties, has never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty and will not allow inspectors. I believe Netanyahu is attempting to refocus attention on Iran because the agreement to remove chemical weapons from Syria reached by the United Nations threatens to cast the spotlight on the fact that Israel also has a huge arsenal of chemical and biological weapons. It possesses these weapons of mass destruction, which it has never disclosed, in violation of nuclear, biological, and chemical conventions. And Netanyahu and other hawks in Israel are terrified at the thought that they might actually be held responsible under international law, which they have made a practice of flouting in the past.
Now, let's go to Ms. Ben-Mir on this. Ms. Ben-Mir, we heard Netanyahu put some... I just put this question to you first before you go with the response. There were some demands made by Mr. Netanyahu today at the UN General Assembly. He said if a diplomatic solution is going to work, Iran needs to put its entire nuclear program away. He said it has to stop enriching uranium, it has to dismantle its nuclear program. Now, aren't those demands, do you think, unrealistic demands that are being made by Israel, that even we might think that the United States or other allies of Israel will not be willing to put these kinds of demands that are too extreme on Iran?
Well, let me just suggest to you that if Rouhani is willing to sit down and negotiate, there's no question that in any kind of negotiations, there's got to be some give and take. For example, President Rouhani would like to remove the sanctions or ease the sanctions. That's perfectly legitimate requirement. On the other hand, he needs to demonstrate that, in fact, Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapons program. So what it means is, as they enter into negotiations, it has to have some quid pro quo. If the United States eases a certain sanction, then Iran needs to demonstrate that it is, for example, stopping from enriching uranium. The United States can take another step, and the Iranian need to reciprocate. So there's a question here of long-standing distrust between the United States and Iran. You cannot mitigate distrust by simply making declarations or going on the charm offensive. That's not going to work. Yes. There's tremendous amount of distrust, there's tremendous amount of suspicion, there's tremendous amount of concern in terms of national security of the entire region in the Middle East. And therefore, if Iran wants to become a constructive player, then it ought to demonstrate, ought to show its all cards and begin a real process of reconciliation. I must disagree vehemently of your other guest. Ahmadinejad has threatened Israel, not the government. We have many documents to that effect, that it threatened Israel to be wiped out of the face of the earth. That is why Israel takes the Iranian threat rather seriously. Let me just give you an example. When Pakistan was developing nuclear weapons, Israel did not say one word, because Pakistan never threatened Israel in any directly or indirectly. That is not the case with Iran. And so therefore, to clear the air, to clear the way for some kind of an agreement, diplomatic solution, all sides needs to work on this very hard and be prepared to be much more transparent, as Rouhani himself said, and that's what's going to take.
Yes, we did hear Netanyahu saying that he sees all Iranian governments as being the same and following the same policy, he said, against Israel. And he was suggesting there that it doesn't matter if it's Ahmadinejad, if it's Rouhani, they all want Israel not to exist. And we know that with the new government, with the foreign minister, Mr. Zarif speaking and Rouhani speaking, this has not been the case of Iran specifically saying that. But just before we continue with the debate, I'd like to give our viewers a chance to take a look at some of the comments that have been posted on our Facebook page. We'll take a look at those comments now, and I'll be back with the rest of the debate.
Iran has resisted all the threats and sanctions by the West and made many scientific and military achievements. Washington has finally tasted the bitterness of being hostile to Iran. Now it's after Tehran's friendship. Israel cannot live without wars and threats in the Middle East. Peace and stability in the region will lead to the isolation of Israel. Any good relation between Iran, Arab states and the West will lead to the collapse of Israel. It's really surprising that the Israeli regime, with nuclear weapons and a history of full wars and aggressions against other nations, wants to dismantle the peaceful nuclear program of Iran, which meets all its commitments regarding international law and the NPT requirements. It is the Israeli nuclear arms that must be dismantled.
Some of the comments posted on our Facebook page. I'll go straight to our guest in Madison, Mr. Fetzer. Before we take a look at those comments and questions related to them, I'd just like to put a question to you regarding what was said by our guest in New York. He was saying that the charm offensive by Iran is not enough, that in order for mistrust to be resolved between the two sides, that action is needed. But this is also what Iran is asking the US. Iran is saying that we can't, after 3 decades of mistrust, expect the United States to say something and then, you can't expect Iran to trust them when they say that they want rapprochement with Iran, that they are recognizing Iran's nuclear rights. Already we're seeing contradictory remarks being made by Obama on this, even in his remarks. So what do you think is needed for that confidence building?
Well, it's necessary to take a hard, objective look at the evidence. Iran has never made an effort to overthrow the government of the United States. But in 1952, Kermit Roosevelt and the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran. It's atrocious to suggest the U.S. has reasons to distrust Iran when Iran has every reason to distrust the United States. Iran is a peaceful nation, hasn't attacked any other country for over 300 years, has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, allows inspectors, and is perfectly entitled to develop a peaceful nuclear energy program. Lurking in the background is the fact that Iran has the capacity to provide nuclear fuel rods to developing nations at much lower prices than the American nuclear energy industry, which would like nothing better than to cut off the competition that Iran represents. The situation is completely hypocritical. I am hopeful that Obama will follow the lead provided by the American people when they objected overwhelmingly, some 90% of the American people, to the idea of throwing cruise missiles into Syria, which would not only kill many more Syrians than the administration alleges had died from the use of these gas attacks, which clearly were committed by the rebels and not by the Syrian government, but would be an obvious violation of international law when Obama claims to be upholding international law. I'm reminded of the stories from Vietnam. We had to destroy the village in order to save it.
Well, let's go to our guest in New York, Mr. Ben-Meir. When Israel is speaking Iran as having the appetite, in Netanyahu's words, for aggression, as being seen as a threat, let's look at the facts here. Iran has time and again said that it's not pursuing nuclear weapons, and it's also said that it's not threatening any regional country, and at the same time that even its military programs are purely defensive. It does not intend to launch any aggression on any country whatsoever. At the same time, Israel, we've been seeing, has been following aggressive policies. It's been attacking Gaza. It's launched an attack on Lebanon in these past years. So why should Iran be seen as a threat or as having an appetite for aggression?
Look, I do not necessarily support everything that the Israeli government is doing. I was one of those consistently calling for Israel to end the occupation, allow for the establishment of a Palestinian state, because the Palestinians deserve to live independent and in a independent state and live their life as they see fit. That has nothing to do with the issue with Iran. Iran, as Prime Minister Netanyahu, has been engaged in various violent activities around the world. I mean, there's a great deal of material in that regard. you know, everybody can engage in all kind of conspiracy theories. One thing is clear. If Iran would like to have diplomatic relation, normal relationship with the United States, so does Israel, believe it or not. Israel would not want anything more than having peace with Iran and with the rest of the Arab world. I am not suggesting to you that Israel is perfect. I am not suggesting to you that Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing only the right thing. What I am saying, two wrongs doesn't make anything right. Iran now it's willing to have better relations with the West. It is Iran now responsibility to demonstrate that it is not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and it is willing to show to the entire international community what is exactly doing in the Fordo plans, what it exactly trying to achieve. Yes, Iran should have and could have peaceful nuclear program.
Mr. Ben-Meir, I'm really sorry for stopping you.
International supervision.
I'm afraid we are very short in time. I'd just like to allow Mr. Fetzer to give a response to what you said there. Mr. Fetzer, do you think that Israel is actually in favour of relations between Iran and the US, Iran and the West, and is working towards that aim? Quickly, if you can.
Israel is trying to defeat any normalization of relationship between Iran and the United States, which would be all for the good. Israel has committed many terrorist acts and blamed them on others, including Iran. In 1992, it attacked its own Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, and then again in 1994, its own Jewish community center. I have published on this with Adrian Salbucci. Israeli attacks, terrorist attacks in Argentina, 1992, 1994. And there are many other instances of terrorism committed by Israel, not by Iran.
Mr. James Fetzer, professor with the University of Minnesota Duluth, with us there live from Madison. Thank you very much. Big thank you to our guest in New York as well, Mr. Alan Ben-Meir, Mideast Director of World Policy Institute. Thank you so much for being with us. That does bring us to an end of this edition of The Debate. Thank you for staying with us. From me, Homa Lesgi, it's goodbye.